The sun is about 10 minutes away from setting, away to the west here, and as it does so, it's setting over Yemen, because we've drifted quite a long way west-northwest today, and drifted off Bertram Thomas's path of 1928. And we went to a community called Thumreit, and from Thumreit we drove for another hour to a small community called Shusser, which is something we'll be explaining more about tomorrow in our podcast. It's a very important archaeological site, and anyway, more about that tomorrow. But halfway through the journey this morning, we drove past another important place. But this is a place that is important for the future of Oman and not looking back. And that place was called Harwheel. And what makes Harwheel so special is that as we drove past, there were 13 enormous wind turbines. And those wind turbines are the first in a phased evolution, really, to move Oman away from an oil and gas based economy to a green energy hub and a low carbon economy. I don't know too much about that. It's part of Vision 2040, which is the government's strategic plan. But I was fortunate enough a couple of months ago when I was in Muscat to catch up with someone who does know a lot. And that man is Dr Firas Al Abduwani, who's a real expert on renewable energy and government strategy. You can listen to a lengthy podcast with Dr Firas and many other inspiring and innovative Omani leaders on our website, jewelofarabiaexpedition.com. You'll find Dr Firas talking about renewable energy. You'll find Dr Layla Al-Harthi talking about the importance of frankincense. You'll find Taimur Al-Saeed talking about the work he does with the Nubian ibex. You'll find people like Talal Hassan talking about the work he did that saw him recognised as one of His Royal Highness Prince William's Earthshot Prize winners. So go to the website, jewelofarabiaexpedition.com. There are half a dozen or more fantastic podcasts for you to listen to there. But in the meantime, I'm going to take you back to a recording I did several months ago in Muscat with Dr Firas about Oman's renewable energy strategy. What's really lovely to see and experience in Oman is this transition from an economy based on carbon to an ambition to become a green energy hub, a global green energy hub. And whenever I speak to people about, well, where can I find out about this transition, everyone points me to one extraordinary man called Dr Firas Al Abduwani. And my conversation with Dr Firas is absolutely fascinating. He's a real pioneer and a visionary who's had an extraordinary career path, and now works as Director General of Renewable Energy, including green hydrogen, at the Ministry of Energy and Minerals in Oman. Oman is uniquely placed in terms of its strategic position on the southeast part of the Arabian Peninsula. It's got plentiful land, it's got wind, it's got abundant solar energy, and it's really made a great move to be one of the first countries in the world to move towards green hydrogen production with a target of net zero by 2040. Dr. Firas, where are we in regards to this journey from a carbon-based economy to Oman becoming a green energy hub?
So today, if we look at Oman, and I would have to start that by saying that we're quite blessed. So the whole world is going through this decarbonization and electrification and trying to counter the emissions that we as humanity produce. And I would say that for at least the majority of the population, we were not aware of the consequences of our actions. And Oman is one of the few nations which is blessed to have rich resource in both oil and gas and renewable energy, which is an opportunity for us to be able to pivot. So today, Oman remains a predominantly oil and gas-based economy. We also believe that we will continue to rely on oil and gas in a more sustainable and a more carbon-conscious manner. But we also have the opportunity to pivot towards renewable energy and integrating that quite strongly into our energy mix. And you mentioned the shift from Minister of Oil and Gas to Minister of Energy. And this is something that is universal, to be honest, because Electricity at one point was seen as a utility and a predominant, depending on where you are, but it was at least the majority of the world is predominantly hydrocarbon driven. As electrification became more prominent, as renewable energies dropped in cost and they became more mature, it made sense to blend these together into one entity, and that's why many ministries transformed from Ministry of Oil and Gas to Ministry of Energy. And if we take it a step forward, you'll see that many ministries today are actually ministries of energy and climate affairs, or ministries of, if you take the UK, for example, it's called the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. So, and you need to blend the two together, the decarbonization with energy, or the economy with decarbonization, depending on what is the main driver of your economy. In Oman, we're energy driven, so energy and climate affairs, and many other countries have that. It makes sense because they do not necessarily run in tandem. And you need to have one policymaker to be able to orchestrate the transition in an orderly manner. And this is something that Oman is really focused on. So we have it at the ministerial committee level, where the coordination is happening to ensure that we transition from a predominantly oil and gas economy to a sustainable, friendly, and clean energy-driven economy in a very planned manner.
And roughly, do you know roughly what the percentage of the national income currently comes from oil and gas?
I would say it's above 70%.
About 70%. Okay, that's interesting. And because I live in northern Scotland, and whenever I drive up to see my family, I look out across the sea. These enormous wind farms. The Beatrice Field, I think, was one that Prince Charles opened a couple of years ago, and you know that pivot is happening in Scotland as well as Oman, and you know, when we do our journey through Oman on the Jewel of Arabia project that we're working on, obviously we will pass through pretty wild areas, and we will be relying on small solar panels to recharge our communications equipment, because actually a simple journey like ours does have a lot of tech, laptops, satellite phones, mobile phones, and we had 3 solar panels going across the Rub al Khali 6 or 7 years ago, and the intensity of the sun in the central desert with blue sky was incredible. I think 1 hour a day with 3 panels unfolded charged up all of our equipment, more than we needed, and I completely understand what you're saying in terms of Oman being blessed with that, yeah, with that resource. So obviously, I think people outside of Oman would associate sunshine with Oman, but the wind. A lot of people listening to this outside of Oman might not know that in the summer we have several months of monsoon wind, the Kharif, that blows, that provides another renewable resource that's accessible to Oman. And so where is Oman in the onshore and offshore wind economy?
Sure. So Oman is definitely blessed. I mean, Kharif is a beautiful season for a seasoned adventurer as you are. You've seen what the areas next to Rub al Khali, and also in the south and west of Oman, the middle section of Oman, how they transform in the different seasons. And blessedly, the wind, although it intensifies in certain areas during Kharif, in fact, one of the reasons why Oman is considered blessed is that there are some spots in Oman where the wind is throughout the whole year. And if we look at the solar intensity or radiance, Oman is in the top 13 nations. If we look at these spots in Oman, some of them bring Oman into the top 20 areas in the nations when it comes to wind alone. The beautiful thing is that when you combine the two profiles, so if you go to these spots which are rich in wind, they also happen to be rich in solar, and if you look at the two profiles together and aggregate them, then Oman becomes one of the top 5 nations in the world of the aggregate profile. As you know, of course, solar is during the day hours, so you have a profile, and then you have the wind, and in Oman, the wind, or in these spots, the wind happens to pick up at night slightly more than it is at the evening. So they sort of average out. Does not become a perfect flat line, as would be the ideal scenario, the combination of the two, but it's not far off. So we have an aggregate of wind and solar that together puts Oman as one of the 5 top spots where if you generate these efficiently and cost effectively, then the levelized cost of electricity is one of the cheapest in the world. So harnessing this energy and utilizing it, and of course doing it environmentally friendly manner, and thinking of the environment and the society, These are all things that we are working on. It will help Oman transition towards a greener economy.
And does Oman have any offshore wind turbines at all yet?
So these are things that we are looking at. So there are spots where Oman is very rich in offshore. But what you do is that you transition both from a technology perspective and a cost perspective. So today, when you start with wind, onshore wind is typically cheaper than offshore wind. And then you also have the floating wind farms, which are another level of pricing further when you compute things into a levelized cost, which is what we use in the industry. So we look at what, at the end product, the electricity unit that comes out, what it costs. So onshore wind is cheaper. We do have a smallish wind farm. I think it was the GCC's first. It has a 50 megawatt plant in Harwheel. And right now, if you look at the multitude of projects coming up from Hydrogen Oman, Hydrom for short, we have in excess of around 20 gigawatts of solar and wind coming up by 2030. So that's a large amount. Oman's grid is 10 gigawatts. We're adding the equivalent of twice as many or 3 times as many of the renewable energy capacity to Oman. A lot of this will be destined towards either export in the form of an energy carrier, such as liquefied hydrogen or ammonia or methanol or a liquid organic carrier, but also a large portion of it we hope to domesticate by bringing in new industries, the hard-to-abate industries, and to host them into Oman and to consume the hydrogen itself and the renewable electricity in Oman by producing green products that then can be exported onto the nation. To other nations.
Incredible. And I happen to, one joy of Oman is it's not that much smaller than Britain, but you only have 4.5 million people. The problem with Britain is that we have a huge population, and I happen to live in a little village in Scotland where I think the problem in my own country is the infrastructure to carry the energy that's generated, and a lot of people objecting, and I'm probably one of them, I suspect, to these enormous pylons that are going to go through areas of scenic beauty. So, I think the British government has its own challenges in terms of it's not just building the turbines and huge arrays of solar panels, it's transporting that energy to where it's needed, and that's another story for another day. But in terms of going on to hydrogen and green hydrogen, this is something that I've been fascinated in reading about. I didn't realise there were so many colours of hydrogen, and now I understand a little bit more about what they mean. But what makes Oman so unique and potentially a major global player in green hydrogen? When I guess other GCC countries are making the same assumption, what gives Oman a little bit of a competitive edge in terms of our neighbours? Happy
to address that. As you mentioned, there are many colours of hydrogen, and different nations are taking different routes. Green hydrogen, just to explain, is one that it comes from renewable energy. And green hydrogen, so let's start with the grey hydrogen, which is the typical hydrogen used globally. That is predominantly made from fossil fuels. So majority of it globally today comes from coal, and then from natural gas, and then from oil, and it goes through a steam methane reformation where you blend steam with the gasified hydrocarbon, and then through a chemical separation you get hydrogen coming out, and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. And in fact, for every kilogram of hydrogen that you produce through conventional fossil fuels, you get around 12 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So it's one of the dirtiest industrial gases that are being used today. 99% of hydrogen consumed in 2020 was in the grey form. And now with the decarbonization that's happening, there's a strong incentive to try and find clean sources. Blue is where you take the emissions and store them. So you capture it, that's where CCUS comes in, or CCS, carbon capture and store, and that works. Britain is moving quite strongly in that field, and I had the pleasure of visiting the UK a month ago to learn from the experiences. Green is where Oman stands out, and this is a different process altogether. We take distilled water and we use electrolyzers to split the water into oxygen and hydrogen. And now I address the question with this long background. But why Oman is potentially going to be one of the world leaders in the export or the generation, and hopefully also the consumption of clean hydrogen. One is because of the levelized cost of electricity. So a large portion, potentially up to 70% of the cost of your end product, green hydrogen, comes from the cost of electricity. And because of this resource that we have, solar and wind together, and quite large stretches of the land, we can produce hydrogen at very competitive prices. So that's one. You mentioned the density of population you have in the UK, the challenges, the permitting. We have a much easier situation here in Oman, where the areas where we're endowed with the renewable energy happen to be sparsely populated, and ones which have low interactions with other government entities. These are lands that are now having a first use in a way. So that is fantastic. The third is the geographic location. So now hydrogen happens to be a very difficult molecule to transport. So the easiest way to transport it is in a gaseous form along pipelines. And this is something that, for example, the south of Europe is trying to consider with the northern part and western part of Europe. So that's the approach, for example, Spain is pushing forward. And perhaps even Morocco, Northern Africa, across the sea. In Oman, we do not have that opportunity, but we are geographically located between two economic blocks that are desperate for decarbonized energy carriers, and that is Southeastern Asia and Western Europe. And we're geographically located in a position where, with the advancements that are expected in transporting hydrogen, we can become a hub. And what aids that, and that's the fourth point, is that Oman has a very strong infrastructure when it comes to ports, shipping, electricity grid, so all of the infrastructure. And then the fifth point, of course, is the human resources. So yes, we're a small population, but we have a large number of young, working and professional and highly educated engineers and human resources who are eager to participate in a decarbonized economy. So we have, these are five of the key characteristics that I believe puts Oman among the top contenders for being a green hydrogen producer and potentially exporter and consumer as well.
Fantastic. And Oman as a country has a Vision 2040, a strategic plan and a goal that we're working towards, which is 15, 16 years ahead of us. If you were to polish your crystal ball and to look ahead, for the average person going about their life in Muscat or Oman, what differences do you think might exist in 15, 16 years' time in terms of our energy source and our lifestyles? What this movement to renewables, how might it show itself, do you think?
So from my perspective, what I really hope, and it's actually one of the drivers for me to wake up every morning energized to go to work and to do what I do among the different colleagues around me, is to move to a sustainable and environmentally friendly way of life. And Oman, as you know, has always had that. His Majesty Sultan Qaboos had established an environmental award way ahead of any of our neighbors in the region. So it's something that is part of our DNA. We're very much a nation that is in touch with nature. You and I both share our love of going on treks and hikes and canyoneerings. I'm not as extreme as you are, perhaps. I have my abseils that I do, but we really love nature, all of us, the majority of the Omanis. So what I see is that first thing is that things become more visible. The segregation between grey electricity and clean electricity. Today that's not visible in Oman, but it is something that other nations have and that Oman is working on. So we can consciously, as citizens, decide on whether we want to buy dirty electricity or buy clean electricity. And hopefully there will be a majority of the power in 2040 you mentioned. By that time, I would expect that at least 60% of the electricity blend to be clean, if not further than that. In fact, it should be beyond that, because by 2050 it will be completely green. So electricity will be green. Energy efficiency will be something that is ingrained within our society. We've seen Europe, the snap. Luckily, blessedly, this winter was not so extreme, but many nations went through rationing exercise of gas consumption and others. And it's now, to be honest, a part of life that we need to be conscious of. And I expect Omanis and Oman to be very much aware and conscious of energy efficiency. So we addressed energy efficiency, we addressed the issue of clean electricity itself. What I expect by that time also is for us to have an abundance of industries that are related and revolve around a circular economy and sustainable economy and based on clean electricity. I think the green hydrogen projects will be up and running by 2040. One of the benefits of having these projects is that they generate an abundance of potable water and then distilled water, and it's done through clean energy. And now one of the things that Oman can benefit from is its food security. So by having an abundance of water which goes into the hydrogen creation, the marginal cost will be low compared to the current desalination we have, which means that vertical farming, aquaculture, different forms of things that are related to our food security will be enshrined. And that is one of the things I hope to see by 2040, inshallah.
Well, Dr. Firas, I think with people like you involved in the mix, I think there's every chance of making that a reality, and I hope I'm still around in 2040 to see where we are. But thank you very much for your time and your insights.
Thank you very much, sir.